Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Neil AI podcast. Today we'll be talking about marketing strategies for AI-driven companies. We will have Michele Chambers with us, who is one of the top leaders on the marketing space for B2B companies with a huge impact on the analytics and AI sectors. Every sentence Michele says on this podcast is loaded with value and will make you rethink your marketing strategy as an AI company. So listen until the end because you will regret it if you don't. Let's go for it. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Neil AI podcast. Today we have with us Michele Chambers. She is a marketing expert, entrepreneur, and recognized author. She has been in senior management roles as director and VP levels in marketing and sales in companies such as Revolution Analytics, the guys behind the R programming language, RapidMiner, one of the tools that actually defined the AI landscape in the last 20 years, Continuum Analytics, the company behind Anaconda, and several other companies such as JP Morgan, AWS, IBM. Michele is now the CEO of the Break Through the Noise, a fractional CMO agency for B2B companies. Thank you, Michele, for being here. It's an honor for us to host you in the.
I'm excited to be chatting with you, Kelvin. So thank you for bringing me onto your podcast.
Thank you so much. So I would like to start with your career because it's actually very impressive the roles where you have been. So you have worked over the last years on products that strongly shape the current market of analytics, AI, machine learning, etc. So what would you say is different or what is different now versus 10, 20 years ago in this ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think one of the very big changes is that 20 years ago, when you talked about analytics, that was a synonym talking about SaaS, SAS, the company. And that was a proprietary set of tools and ecosystem that was mostly focused around statistics. And so people, when they talked about it, were really talking about statisticians doing very much back office type of analysis. And everything was in a locked-in proprietary environment. And what has changed over time, so you had that happening, and in parallel, you had sort of the AI movement. And the AI movement has gone through many cold winters, as we would like to describe it, right? So like in the 70s, some of the folks at MIT were making some really great strides around AI and are really like the great grandfathers of pushing AI. And then what happened was there was a lot of pushback around AI and a lot of scare tactics that were used. And so it went into a dark recess in a cold winter. And so you had that kind of going on in parallel with this more and more of a business adoption around SaaS and analytics and moving into predictive analytics. So that was the way like SaaS sort of soft pedaled anything that was looking forward, doing any kind of forecasting or any kind of regression type of analysis. And so then with that started the evolution of people thinking about not just predictive analytics, but then looking at prescriptive analytics using simulation technologies as well. And really like Gartner, who focuses on the mass majority for the most part, pinning that the pinnacle, the place that the summit that you want to reach in this is to get to prescriptive analytics, which is all about optimization. And that really was constraint-based thinking because with AI, it required a large set of data, and we didn't have the computing infrastructure to really collect that volume of data nor process it at any kind of, that's when you were using craze and supercomputers, and it was really relegated to very specialized type of applications. So with that, along came Hadoop, right? And Hadoop was this infrastructure that all of a sudden allowed you to create an MPP, so a massively parallel processing environment, which is what the supercomputers were, except they were all in one container, one box, one frame. And you now had the power to use commodity hardware in a distributed computing environment. And so you could do things that you had not been able to do before. So you could collect huge amounts of data. You could process that huge amount of data in a very short period of time. And so Hadoop was really the catalyst that allowed us to start thinking about using more AI techniques, right? And so with that, you came along machine learning to learn from larger historical data and to use more variables in the analysis or the predictions. And what I think really added fuel to the fire, and it started with Hadoop because Hadoop was an open source project that then became commercialized as well. What you had going on in parallel was an open data science kind of environment happening. And that was really propelled by Python because Python had foundational libraries around all of the math pieces of that underpin all these algorithms for machine learning and other AI techniques. And so Python being open source really created just fuel on the fire to take advantage of these distributed environments that now had a lot more data to be able to process. And that's what's really led to this next generation of AI. And what you're starting to see is people aren't where 20 years ago, people were afraid of AI, like we were going to have the board come and take over, right? And, even today, we still have a little bit of that scare tactic going on where people will talk about AI as though it's an alive thing. And we're pretty, like the experts really will say that, they can't tell, like, are we going to have generalized AI, which really would be like an independent entity that can think on its own. They can't really tell, is it like going to happen tomorrow or is it going to happen like 20,000 years from now, right? Like there's not a really good idea of that. And what you've seen now in the marketplace is with ChatGPT, again, remember, open source, right? Creating like this huge catalyst and accelerator. What you've seen is that some people think that ChatGPT is more intelligent than simply doing the pattern matching, which is really what machine learning is all about. And so you're starting to see some people thinking maybe it's nearer term for us to have generalized AI. Okay, that was a lot, but that's what I see as the big difference. So
yeah. You mentioned the AI winters. So would you say that up to a certain point, open source is a way of diversifying AI in the sense of where AI is being developed, and so it's protecting us from a new winter, in a sense that it's not just a few companies that are boosting AI, but as a whole, the world has many initiatives around that will keep AI alive? Or are we still facing a potential new winter in the...
I think the train has left the station and it isn't coming back. I think people now are much more willing to utilize data. We have now multiple generations that have grown up as digital natives and they're accustomed to utilizing data in different ways. So I actually don't think we're going to wind up with another AI winter unless something hugely catastrophic were to happen. And I don't foresee that. I see that that people, for the most part, are tempered. And I do think that there's validity to people who are worried about ethical issues around AI, because this happens oftentimes where technological advances outpace our government's ability to understand and figure out how to put the right guardrails in place so that we don't go awry with it. So I think that there's validity to that. And I think that that we have to get more younger generations involved in government so that they have a deeper understanding, not just a surface level understanding of what the implications are with AI, and that they put the right guardrails in place. I think you can look at social media and see where we had a missed opportunity there for that, right? And so there's correlations, some people will say it's causation, around the rise of social media and disinformation in the world, right? And so we missed the opportunity to put the right guardrails in place around social media because we didn't understand, like governments, not just US government, like governments around the world didn't understand how to understand the technology, understand where it couldn't forecast and foresee where it was going to head and what were some of the implications and problems that could unravel with the technology by not putting the guardrails in place. And I think the same thing's true here for AI. As we all know, like, it's easy to bias your model, right? Because if you use, so I can speak to this personally, right? I'm a woman, right? But from a healthcare perspective, everything that a doctor tells me is all based on pretty much research around men, right? And men and women's bodies are different, right? And so anything that's in a model, which there's tons of models that are used in healthcare, it's all got some bias in it, which may not be appropriate for me, right? Which is why personalized medicine is so important, because you have to really take that as data and information as input, but then figure out what's right for you.
Yeah. At the same time, we're collecting so much metadata now that at least we have the control variables we need to potentially remove or mitigate at least some of these biases in the future that we didn't have before, when humans were just getting intuition on the data.
Exactly.
Perfect.
And I always tell people, like, if the model is wrong, right? So I was with a company that was acquired by Netezza, and we were a bespoke. We really were building AI solutions. We didn't call it that, but we had like 75 PhDs that were renowned in their fields, like, Dr. Dave Davis, who is considered the grandpa of genetic algorithms, and Dr. Thomas Beck, who literally wrote the textbook on evolutionary strategies. And the solutions we deployed for customers, still 20 years later, many of those solutions are still trade secrets. They didn't want to patent them for good reason, right? Because then they'd have to open it up at some point. And they kept it as a trade secret because it provided such a magnitude of unfair advantage in their marketplaces that they wanted to keep it a trade secret. That kind of technology, what made that unique was not that we didn't know how to build AI solutions. We built AI solutions. What really made it unique in those solutions, what that they actually did was we had scientists who combined all these technologies. So, and I find that often the case today, where just like when I talked to a SAS-based statistician, they only saw the world through the prism, through the rose-colored glasses of a statistician, nothing else. Like, they could not think any other way. And the scientists that we had would understand what the problem was and work backward to figure out what are the various tools that they had available to get the best outcome for the customer. And oftentimes it was a combination of using machine learning tech. We do data mining to understand the data very well. We would then do machine learning techniques to be able to do a reasonable forecast or prediction. If we didn't have good data, didn't have good quality data, we might combine that with synthetic data that we produced using simulation. We'd combine that, those forecasts then would go into an optimizer to create a robust optimization, which really means like it's a set of the best answers, because if you come out with just the best answer, it's like the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray, and your best plan is probably not going to work out. So as a human, this ties back to like your comment about humans. What if I'm like, early in my career, I worked in supply chain execution, and what did these poor guys that are on a dock, right? They have a plan that tells them like how to best pack, take the orders, pack them, and ship them at the end of the day or during the day to get them to customers on time at the lowest cost. But a door breaks or a shipment arrives like 3 hours, a truck arrives 3 hours late. And so what do? As a human, you're just going to do what you're going to optimize, do like a local optimization to figure out what's the best thing to just get stuff off of the dock and onto the trucks, right? And that may not fit the best plan. And so when we were in supply chain, we would offer up multiple plans for them, so that if something went wrong, they had a backup plan. They had a plan B, had a plan C, and they could push a button and generate a new plan based on whatever conditions that we may not have anticipated have actually occurred, right? And that's when we are in business and we can create optimized plans at the touch of a button, like with the big red easy button for people. That's when I think we have won from an AI perspective, because what most of the time people, we have the models that we build today are relatively simplistic. They don't have a high degree of uncertainty, and they don't have a high degree of complexity. The solutions we built at this company had both of those in there. And that actually mirrors the real world. And that's why in the past, I would say, business culture-wise, there was pushback around actually using solutions because they weren't holistic enough, right? They weren't robust enough to take into account the gray hair and intuition I have as a 30-year business executive at some company, right? They seem simplistic, and they're getting more sophisticated. And so then I start to be able to rely on them, right? And why is that happening? It's happening because of also consumerism, right? Digital consumerism, right? Where we now rely on, my phone is better than some of those old Crays, right? Like it has more compute power and can give me answers that the Cray couldn't give me. So now we start to rely and trust that what we get out of our systems and applications is a lot stronger and a lot more valid than it used to be.
Yeah. How does the progress of this tool, or at least the perceived value of these tools 20 years ago versus now, changes the way these companies can position their products in the market?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So at the end of the day, most AI horizontal platforms are looking for providing revenue gains for customers, because that's the easiest way to sell a horizontal solution, right? Because cost savings, people can cut their way to like a target number through cost savings. And there's lots of tools and methods to be able to do that. What's more difficult to do is figure out where can you generate new revenue, right? So how can you create positive returns based on growing your market, growing your revenue share? And so that's the way many of these platforms try and attempt to do that. To me, there's a big difference between the go-to-market around a horizontal platform, like an Anaconda, that's a horizontal data science platform, versus an applied application, right? So like the solutions we were building at that company were applied applications of AI, right? So I'll give you an example. We did a project for a large German, very famous manufacturer that is a company that builds lotions, hand creams, right? And they knew that they had a very popular product, and it was used by pretty much middle-aged women. And they knew that through their market research, that there was a very lucrative other market segment that was like the 19 to 25, 26-year-olds, okay? And they had been trying for like 10 years to develop a formulation that would work for that population. And they were never their scientists just kept failing, right, at doing that. And they didn't really believe that we would be able to do it, but we did. So what did we do? The first thing we did was, when you're building formulations, there's a whole bunch like the viscosity of the formulation, the viscosity changes for like what's interesting to me at 60 versus somebody at 40 versus somebody at 20. So all these different variables that go into it. So the first thing we did was we talked to their scientists, their chemists. We came up with what were the rules that they used for their what's called design of experiments. And those experiments, as a human, what you tend to do is that you have something that works, and you do a variant, something that's relatively close to the one that you already know that works. But they knew that they had this other target that might be way out here, and their scientists kept trying to get closer to that, but weren't really getting there. So we created this rules-based system. We had them verify that the rules for the design of experiments was accurate. We calibrated that. And then we used that to come work backwards. So we had a target variable of this particular market. We knew the characteristics based on market research that target market was looking for in a formulation for a hand cream. And then we generated a robust set of potential formulations that hit that target variable. So what we were doing was we were taking, because that is a huge, like billions and billions of combinations is essentially what that is. And a human can't process that. So it's a search landscape. And when you're in a search landscape, if you're down in a valley, just like if you're hiking and you look up at the mountains, you're like, oh, there's the peak. And I get all excited and I'm like going for that peak. Then I get to the peak and I'm like, oh, there were more peaks beyond this, right? That I couldn't see when I was down in the valley. And so that's what typically happens when you are constrained based on compute power or based on your data. And so what we were able to do using these very sophisticated AI techniques was be able to search a larger part of the landscape in a short period of time to generate, when I say robust solutions, like looking down in this valley, Valley 1, this might be the best possible solution. But now there's another one 3 valleys away that's maybe on a higher elevation that I could potentially get to, right? That gives me higher returns or gets me higher market share. And so now you come up with a portfolio of potential solutions that you can offer up. So we were able to do that. They were able to triage, right? You still need a human in the loop, right? They were like, oh, we didn't have a rule about this. And so, of course, this solution won't work, but we didn't give you a rule about it. So we understand why you came up with, Valley 3 valleys away. And right out of the gate, based on this formulations that we gave them a plan, they were able to select one, which was far afield from anything they had ever done. And it was successful, gained market share, and it allowed them to open up a whole new market segment for them. Now, did they have to continue using that for all the other variants they created there, like bubblegum flavored or whatever it was? No, right? But it was that first entry, and that created that helped the company grow significantly by being able to do that. And so that's what you see. Like the future world is when you have those types of applied app. Now, how many people in the world need an application like that? Not that many, okay? But the value that it created, right, was huge. And if you think about these solutions, you can then start to see analogies of how other industries, other problems, even within, let's say, chemical companies or CPG companies how they could actually use design of experiments to come up with other new product introductions, right? There's ways of doing that. So the horizontal platforms tell a very different story than an applied application. And what you're seeing unfold in the market now is that these types of applied AI applications have to have like more business context around it. So like even though like that design of experiments, let's say solution was great, it needed to be integrated into an ecosystem within their business process, right? And so that gives you a beachhead in which to create a whole ecosystem. So when anybody comes to market with just like an applied solution, they tend to be very niche-y. And so therefore they don't get funded, right? It's very hard for VCs to look at that and say why they would invest and take money at a high risk for a relatively low market. And that's why you see VCs tend to fund these horizontal platforms, but these horizontal platforms are dependent upon people. So you have to have people who can build based on that. And they also, the horizontal platforms have difficulty messaging and figuring out like a bowling pin strategy. So like, where do they start, right? And how do they create, what are the adjacencies to go to next so that they can build success in the marketplace?
Okay, so you will say that for horizontal platforms where we're building like an infrastructure, let's say, to do AI, you will favor an open source strategy that promotes usage of that platform. And for more vertical oriented companies would you go for a more proprietary approach where the value of the company is mainly be driven by the IP that the company holds?
I don't think you have to have a proprietary approach when you do the vertical solution. I think you can use open source, but it's the applied knowledge, right? Your domain expertise that creates the extraordinary value in that case.
Yeah, something that I frequently say is the number one cause of failure in AI projects is not data, it's not predictive models, it's not decision making. It's actually like lack of fit with the actual business they are trying to tackle. I mean, it's not actually fitting into the processes of that business. It doesn't include all the model doesn't include all the variables that that business needs to have, or it doesn't even create engagement from the end user to actually use this model and create a trust on these models to then try, for example, these variations of creams or products in real life. So, as working as an AI agency, most of the projects where we weren't able to create value were related with the business side of it. You know, lack of expertise on that specific business, lack of engagement from the end user, and not so much from the technical component of it. So I, I recently say, like, AI is solved from a technical perspective. I know there are many open problems in AI, but for me, like, the biggest challenge is engagement from the business perspective.
Yeah, and that mirrors the experience I had with this company when we were building bespoke. When we first started building solutions, we were brought in essentially by CEOs that had seen about us in things like Scientific America. And they were typically like chaos, I call them chaos junkies. They really subscribe to chaos theory. And they had tried using off-the-shelf products. They had tried using like the big six consulting firms at that time to build solutions. And they fail. Every project would fail. And so they were like, I have this business problem. I know I can create this extraordinary value, but I can't figure out a tool to be able to do that. How do I do that? And so we'd come in, we'd understand that they wanted to go from point A to point like Q, okay? And so the first couple of times we built them a solution to go from A to Q. And those projects failed for exactly what you're saying, which is it was a change management issue. It was a business issue, right? The team that had to operationalize this didn't trust it, didn't have faith in it, and stuff. So that was the cheapest path to get them to the solution that they needed to get to. So we learned through hard lessons that what we needed to do was do it in stepping stones to bring people on that journey with us, right? So we'd go from A to like D, and D might blow their minds a little bit and make them feel a little uncomfortable, but it kind of resonated with their intuition and their gray hair and experience, right? And so they'd adopt it and they'd say, hey, this thing works pretty well, right? Then we would take on another scope of adding to the project. We take them from like D to like L, okay? And now that we had built credibility, and so now we could go to L, right? And they would come with us because now they had trust and they'd say, wow, that comes up with something really different than I would ever come up with. But let me think about this. And you could walk them through it, right? And they would get there with you, right? And so we'd get to L. And then from L, we could take them to Q, right? To like the end goal of where we needed to go to. But it typically took 2 to 3 phases in order for them to come on that journey and accept it and understand how to operationalize it in their business context, all that kind of good stuff. So I'd agree 100%.
How long did each of these phases take for them?
There's a high degree of variability depending on the scope of what we were doing, right? So small 2 to 3 phases were about 18 months, right? And then we had some projects that were 3 to 4 years, right, to get there. So there was a high degree of variability.
Yeah, my question comes from this. So with the current hype on Gen AI, right, and how easy it looks like, how easy it seems to create something with AI nowadays, because you can go to ChatGPT UI and you talk to it and it seems like it's working. There's like a public perception in managers that they can like automate things like this. But like the fundamentals haven't changed that much, and you still need these 18 months, I will say this, for to actually make the business understand the changes they need to apply in order to embrace AI. And yes, maybe you build LL, natural language processing models faster, but you know the the change you need to do in the organization takes time. And sometimes like these small steps, like I feel like they are more thirsty to go from A to Q on day one, and less prone to accept an A to D on day one and take it safely from one step to the other.
Yeah, so I think that the whole Gen AI has made AI feel approachable for most business people, like, to your point, right? And so they are the innovators, the early adopters that are taking it on. They want to go from A to Q, right? And that then talks to a little bit of like the technology adoption life cycle, right? That Jeffrey Moore coined, um, is so evident, like in everything that we do, right? So right now with ChatGPT, what you have is the innovators and early adopters just taking off with it, right? Going like crazy. The mass majority still will be pretty far behind, right? And some people might say, oh, it's already starting to cross the chasm. But until you see it like in deployed, right, it's not really in there. It's early experimentation phases, right? And people are using it in some ways. But like, for instance, like in marketing, right? Marketing creates a lot of content. And so there's a lot of application for ChatGPT in marketing to create content. And yet the platforms that we use don't have it embedded yet because there's going to be a lag, right? It's relatively new. Like these are large enterprisey type of applications. So there's going to be a lag. Are there people that are popping up that are individual? Yes. Has Jasper been around? Jasper, copywriter, Build AI. There's several of them that are content generators and underneath the cover are using ChatGPT. And there's varying degrees of success or not with each of those platforms. And people are using them to generate content, but you still have to have like a human validate, right? Because like lots of times these references are just flat out wrong, right? Or misleading, right? And so you still need somebody to check it, right? And that would be great though, if we had a world in the future, 5, 10, whatever years it is, where a lot of heavy lifting can be done by AI models. And then the humans are really the higher order thinking and learning, right? Where we are validating that it's accurate, and it frees up our mental capacity to really think about higher order problems, right? That to me is nirvana for AI, right? Like it's like, I always tell people, like, if a car were invented today, it would be outlawed, okay? Because like it would be outlawed for you and me to drive it, okay? Not that the car would be outlawed. We would not have, because it's a complex machine, okay? And it requires a lot of like attention and a lot of acumen, right? You have to know a lot of stuff in order to drive a car. And we sort of take for granted that like everybody should drive, but I'd rather have like the AI drive my machine, right, with all these complex variables and stuff. And then like I can sit there and focus on, thinking through my day, my problems, it frees up capacity for me to do other things that the AI is never going to be able to do for me. So
You mentioned at the beginning we were talking about the horizontal AI platforms, that it's tricky to communicate in a sense that you need to talk to a lot of people in the market, but at the same time you need to have like a clear message for each one of them. Do you want to share any success story that you have around building a marketing strategy for these kind of companies? How do you approach this? So if you're building a horizontal platform, you need to be talking with technical people, but also with decision makers. How can you handle that?
yeah, so that's a great question. I am actually in the process of writing a book that will be startup marketing, because what I have found, my background is in engineering, and I have an MBA. So I like to say I'm dangerous. I can talk about stuff, but I can't do anything anymore. Although some people would say I can do more than what I would let on to. What I find is that marketing has been thought of as really an art, okay, and not as much science, except for science in demand generation, lead generation. And what I find is that it is a combination, but it is less art than people would make you think, okay? So I think it's like 10, 15% art, and the rest of it is like kind of science. So when you're developing a messaging platform for a new company, you have to, first of all, know your customer, right? That means you have to understand, what is your ideal customer profile? What is in an ideal customer profile? It is understanding your market segments, your firmographics, your demographics. I also include something I call technographics, which includes things like the adoption life cycle. And then I include something called market signals, okay? So now I have an intimate understanding of my markets, okay, that I'm going after. So that's where you start with your ICP, your ideal customer profile. Once you have that, then you develop your buyer personas. And you develop your buyer personas based on the market segments. And these are generalizations that you have. And they're not the same thing as a user experience persona. That's why I call them specifically buyer personas. And there's different frameworks. I keep it typically simple for startups, where you have your economic buyer, your technical buyer, and your user buyer. And you develop a deep profile and understanding of the psychographics, the demographics and the psychographics, and the buying behavior of each of those personas. Now, all of this comes, and this is where so I jumped in probably a little bit into the details here based on the question, but I'm going to step back for a moment. What I find oftentimes is startups really don't have a business plan. And like business plans, like when I was 20 and developed business plans, are very different today, right? And the leading tool, and maybe you can pull it up, it's the business model canvas, right? It is one of my favorite tools to use. And you start out with a business model canvas. This does not have huge amount of details, but what it does is give you clarity around what is it that is, how are you going to run your business? What are your goals? And how do all of these piece parts integrate together into a business model strategy that differentiates you, right? And if you take a look at a couple of the areas here, you'll see that there's value proposition and customer segments that are very specific to marketing. So it is shocking to me how often I go and I work with a company, so like a horizontal AI platform, and you say, what is your value proposition? So value proposition is what makes you uniquely qualified to be able to answer your customers' problems, okay? And people will start telling me gobbledygook technical stuff that I understand, but is not necessarily what is going to solve a customer's problem, right? So having a clear understanding of what your value prop is critical. And what the business canvas does is, before you have marketing operators involved, you have like a marketing strategist who's sitting at the table with your business leaders that's really helping you figure out that first pass of the onion at your value prop. The second problem I see companies make oftentimes, I go into companies that, I have customers that hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and I go and say, who are your customers? And they can't really tell me who their customers are, right? It's surprising. So what are those customer segments, right? Who are you going after? And what people forget is that you have a limited number of resources, meaning people and time. And the one they forget about is people and money, the one they forget about is time, right? So when you have a startup, you're essentially should be ahead of a market. And there's some inflection point sitting out here. And what you've got to do is be good enough to get to that and be in the right place at the right time, right? To hit that inflection point in terms of the market growth. And you can't, and time is not fungible, right? You cannot replace it, right? Money, I can go get more money. I can go get more people, right? But I can't replace my time. So if you are focused on trying to serve everybody, you're not going to serve anybody. And so it's really important. It's not like that this is where you have to be forever, but when you're starting a business, what are the market segments you're going to focus on? Because you have limited resources and limited time. And so you want to put all your wood behind the arrow in going and conquering something and being really good at it. Then you can go into adjacencies, right? So it's really important you define both of these. And then how you operationalize it is through the ideal customer profile, your buyer personas, a customer journey map. And for me, a customer journey map is a little bit different again, because what you're doing is you're starting with the customer and understanding the different stages or phases that they go through in their buying journey, not the selling journey, the buying journey from their perspective. And then you work backwards to what do you need to do as a marketing organization to help that customer achieve their goals at each of those stages? What do you have to do as a sales organization to help that customer buy at each of those various stages? What do you have to do as an implementation, however you're deploying or implementing at each of those stages? And what do you have to do post-sales, like from a support customer success perspective, to meet the buyer's goals? Because people forget all the time, the cheapest customer you're ever going to get is the one you already got, okay? And so you want to maximize the investment you've made in that customer relationship, which means that you have to continuously nurture your relationships and keep your customers happy. So, yeah. So these horizontal platforms have a tendency to think about like the technical buyer, but not necessarily the economic buyer. And so you have to create your message, you have to create different levels of messaging that address each of the audiences that's appropriate. And you don't want to be mixing them, because that's the other mistake you see, because people like, oh, well, that doesn't address my economic buyer. So then they start mixing the two, right? You really want content and things that address messaging that addresses your economic buyer very clearly and succinctly. And then you provide the right content, and it's oftentimes a different content type, different form factors, different channels, where you address your technical buyers.
Yeah, this is for sure an issue that we have at Nearly AI. And actually, today we were talking about this, like, what is our strategy to talk, for example, with the head of data, which is typically our technical buyer, versus with our economic buyer, which is our head of marketing. And for a lot of time, we try to wrap up everything into a single message. So whoever persona buyer sees this message, it makes sense. But in the end, it's just a salad that nobody wants to eat because it's just too messy to digest, right?
That's no man's land. So like you either have to, you can't be in the middle of things,
Exactly.
you got to be at the baseline or you got to be at the net. So.
Exactly. So, and the issue here is that AI companies, or the founders of AI companies, I don't know if you have read the E-Myth, but basically he defines that every entrepreneur should have like a third of entrepreneur, actually, of the guy with a vision, of a manager, and of a technical. And typically, when we get into the entrepreneurial journey, we are technical people that we are good at what we are, and we just get very much into the technical part of it, and we are just more used to talk with other technical people in our field than with the economic buyer. So we are more used to talk with the technical buyer, and then oftentimes he doesn't have the ultimate decision. He doesn't have he has to do all the heavy lifting of sharing with the economic buyer why does this solution make sense. So thinking about the business model canvas perspective, what I have seen myself at Nearly AI and in other AI companies is that we tend to focus too much on the key resources we have, being the AI models and the AI technology, a key resource and nothing else. and not so much on the value proposition and on the customer segments that we have to address.
Exactly. And what you have is, it's so interesting because founder-led sales, okay, oftentimes I think conflates the issue, okay? So when you have founder-led sales, oftentimes you're selling to your point, to the technical buyer, okay, and you get some early success. So as a founder, you're like, oh, bingo, I've got the formula, right? I'm going to go sell to more of these. And then you have some business person come in and go, no, and you're like, why not, right? Like it worked over here. And you kind of think about, oftentimes what that does is it gives you a beachhead, right? Like you know an area, right? But those folks that have purchased, now you have to go broaden out your messaging and perspective to get to the economic buyer. And your approaches to even find those economic buyers is oftentimes very different than how you found those technical buyers. So I'll give you an example, like when I was at Anaconda, we had a huge open source community. I mean, we would run a webinar and we would have like 1,200 people register for a webinar. I mean, this is like, what, 10 years ago? It was like crazy numbers. I had never seen anything like this, right? Now, how many people would show up? Statistically, like normally, you have a pretty big drop off, like with webinars, okay? So you have like about 30% show up live, okay? We would have like 70%, 80% show up live and interact. Like it was like, and they'd stay on and like all this kind of crazy stuff. And it was because we had built up this community, right? Open source really creates a very different go-to-market model than like a proprietary model does, right? And you have this thing where all of a sudden you're like, you conflate. It's like, my community's growing, okay? But how does that translate into sales, right? Is what you're doing. And what you find in open source is it's really challenging. So like when I first got into open source, I would say I'd go to other professionals that were marketing professionals that had been working in open source a while. And I'd say, how much of your open source community converts into buyers? And people would look at me and they'd go, that's a really good question. And I'm like, okay. And what I get was, I guess it's somewhere between like 1% and 3%, right? And then I'd follow up and say, all right, so how many of yours have converted? And nobody was even close to 1%, okay? And I was stunned by that, right? And so now, and people will use like Red Hat as an example of like a great open source model. But what they forget is it took them like 20 years to be successful, right? And again, context around the point in time that they started and the journey they went on is very different than like today, right? Like even if like you could wave your magic wand and make, Red Hat start again today, it would be a very different journey because the market is at a different place in terms of adoption and rates of adoption. And I don't think they would have either died or they would have had to use a different business model to get to success, and the success would have happened faster, okay? Still longer than other commercial businesses, but it would have happened faster. So translating open source models into revenue producing models is very challenging. They are absolutely integral to helping us grow our technology foundations just in the world, right? And and the communities behind them are heroes from my perspective. The people who dedicate hours and hours without getting paid and for their own passion, they're absolute like heroes in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I think in open source you always need to build like this massive tribe that supports and fights your business, or fights for your business, and it's like a sport fans club. Like they actually fight for it. But then how you move the economic decision maker into also supporting their, let's say, data scientists, programmers, etc., that are supporting this kind of technology. How you communicate to them, and how can you make them part of this community, not necessarily act as active creators, but as economic supporters of these kind of companies.
Yeah, so people have tried both, right? Making them economic supporters, like by creating foundations, by offering support models, by offering subscription models, a whole bunch of different approaches have been used, all with like mediocre success. There hasn't really been anything that's been on the same order of magnitude of success as Red Hat.
Okay, makes sense. One question. What challenges do you see on advising AI startups that you don't see on other startups? And not necessarily like, because I mean, we could say, it's the technical being too technical, but maybe we will see that also in healthcare, right? Or in other very niche domains. So what is the main challenge in AI that you see?
So my challenge, the challenge that I see is that everybody thinks that it's easy to, if you have this amazing product, they will come. They want to build a field of dreams, right? And what they aren't thinking about is the business model canvas. They're typically not going back and thinking through what is the approach we're going to use in order to get unfair advantage in the marketplace and really be able to fuel the growth. What does it realistically take to invest in building this business? And the more than like, if you have like an applied AI company, they tend to be more business people. And so they have a more holistic appreciation for that. No one part of this business is better or more important than the other. It takes everybody to be in the boat and rowing in the same direction to get to success. When you tend to have technology startups with a technical founder, there's a little bit of like the technology is all that matters. There's a little bit of almost arrogance, right? That's the most important, and everybody else they're the first class citizens, and everybody else is a second class citizen. And technology founders usually, they know their technology. They typically know their domain, whatever their expertise is. They typically have done some founder-led sales, and so even if they're not super salespeople, they think they're super salespeople, right? And the area that they know the least about is marketing. Marketing just feels like this black hole, and they don't understand it. And it's easy because you just make things pretty, right? And they don't understand. So what they typically want is they want end results of like typically leads and brand awareness, but they don't understand how to get there. They don't want to make the investments to get there, and they don't understand it requires patience because there's no magic wand. And if anybody tells you there is, go run for the hills because it ain't true. And they don't understand that marketing should actually, like, if I were a startup, right, I would have like my technical founder and my marketing person would be the first two people I would have like on the team, because marketing has to soften the ground for sales to come along, for everything else that follows, right? And if marketing is constantly playing catch up, okay, it doesn't work. I read, it's an older book. It's called like High Ventures, I think, and they use a spider chart. And I hate spider charts because mere mortals don't understand spider charts. But in this case, it was a really good example, which is they plotted all the different functions of a business. So you have sales, marketing, support, tech, engineering, everything, right? And through their research, they found that you can't have any one function be more than 2 standard deviations away from the norm of everybody else. So let's turn that into non-geek language. What that means is, when we start, we're all like here at the center, okay? We're all like operating as a tight group. We can finish each other's sentences. We understand, right? We start adding people to the team. Now communication becomes a little bit more challenging, et cetera, right? Because you have to keep everybody aligned and stuff. And so what happens is somebody, let's say sales, bumps out, right? And they start performing better, okay? Well, that creates pressure on this organism, the ecosystem of the business, and now finance has to bump out, and sale and marketing has to bump out, right? But if you have any one part of an organization that's way out here and the rest of the organization's here, okay, you wind up creating that black hole, okay? Everybody, because there's so much change going on that it becomes chaotic and it creates this black hole that everybody falls into. And I've made that mistake in my career where, I had the board telling me, go as hard and as fast as you can to get the land grab, right? And I did. But what I didn't think about was the amount of pressure that created on the rest of the organization and how I had built this really high-performing team that just outpaced everything else that the organization could deliver on, right? And so then that creates problems in customer satisfaction, right, by doing that. So you have to grow at a pace and a way that everybody can handle and digest. And marketing, while those examples I didn't put, I'm trying to be not egocentric by not putting marketing there in the lead, but marketing sets that foundation, that messaging, right? That sets that positioning, sets up that you have all the things you need in order to grow the sales part of your business. So you should have sales plays, right, et cetera. And you can't do that without having a marketing team that's ahead, because otherwise you're essentially order taking, and you limit the success of your sales organization.
Yeah, makes sense. So in AI companies, typically the technical side of the business is the one that is like the spike on top, and marketing is extremely neglected, let's say, most of the time. But especially now I'm talking to AI people, so we need an ecosystem to test our hypothesis, right? And that ecosystem is what marketing creates. So it creates you like this test bed where you can validate the technology, when you can validate the changes of the technology. So stop neglecting marketing. You should invest more in marketing than on the technology itself, because that is what is going to accelerate the long games.
Yeah, and you have to invest in both, but marketing includes product marketing, and product marketing are market experts, okay? And like the most important thing from a product marketing perspective, most people will say it's all about the sales plays because they're creating the sales plays for the go-to-market motions. And believe me, that's critical, right? The most important thing, though, is they should be doing market opportunity analysis, and they should be doing that on a regular basis. So what is market opportunity analysis? That's taking a look at what's your TAM, SAM, and SOM. So your target addressable market, your serviceable addressable market, and your service obtainable market, right? So your TAM, let's use that horizontal platform, right? So I'm an AI platform for data scientists, let's say, right? So your TAM is how many people are out there that are data scientists that can use my AI platform, right? However many companies, however many people. So that's some huge universe, okay? The serviceable obtainable market within that, right? Let's say I don't do NLP. I don't do any of my natural language or text processing within my platform. So when you look at that TAM for an AI platform, there will be machine learning, generative AI, there'll be text processing, NLP type sentiment type things. Let's just call it simple like that. And let's say that's 20% of the market, okay? So now my SAM is only 80% of what my TAM was, right? And then I have, what can I actually obtain, okay? Like based on my platform, my maturity, my product market fit, I have some smaller part of that I'm actually going to be obtained. I might also have geographic considerations. Like I might only be working in the North America, let's say, territory, right? So I can narrow it down. I use that as then a decision point in all my investment strategies, right? Because like when you're internally in a company, you have limited money, right? So should I invest more in hiring a bunch more engineers next year to build like a feature factory and create more features that will help me get, get the land? Or do I invest in marketing, heavier in marketing to go get grab that land based on the capabilities I have or some mix of it. You don't know unless you understand what the market opportunity is, right? Because with all of this is based on the compounded annual growth rate of the industry as well. And so you want to be able, like, people are like, oh, I'm growing aggressively, I'm growing at 50%. But if your market is growing at 70%, you're falling 20% behind every year. Okay. So you are moving into like the territory where you're going to be marginalized, right? You can't win. You got to be growing at the pace of the market. If you're a growth oriented business, you got to be growing at the pace of the market or outperforming it, right? And then like you can say, oh, I want to use a strategy to outperform in the market. Well, how do you do that? You're either doing, the reason like people early on will go after a land grab is because competitive displacement requires more work and more money to go do, right? It's harder. So that's why like early on, if you're in a growth market, you want to go, grab as much land as you can, because once land gets locked in, like it doesn't change, right? Because humans, we think that we're really good at agile and changing, but we resist change all different ways, right? And so, now I've grabbed my land, and in order for me to grow, I have to take land away from somebody else, and I can do that through organic or inorganic means, through various sales strategies, etc. But that's much harder to be able to do.
Of course. Now I would like to play a small game. Okay. So you
Sure.
mentioned that you can control money, you can control people, but you cannot control time. Okay.
Yep.
So let's assume that you have 1 year. Okay. You are in the early stage. You are advising a startup, an AI startup. Okay. They are in the early stage, and by early stage I mean truly early stage. And you have to define their next year marketing strategy. Let's assume, for example, in this case, the company is like an actually horizontal AI platform, something like RapidMiner. Okay. What will be your plan, your strategy in this case?
Yeah, so you need to do a combination of brand awareness as well as some lead generation. Brand awareness is like sending in the air troops and softening up the ground. For lead generation to follow up to get conversions. And in that case, like for early stage startup, there's two ways, depending on if it's a horizontal company, I would probably invest in digital marketing strategies because they're the best cost per lead. It's like the most cost. It's a way for me to stretch my dollars as far as possible. Oftentimes, startups want to go and do events, okay? And there's a little bit of vanity marketing in wanting to do the events. Events are incredibly high customer acquisition costs, like an order of magnitude higher in terms of customer acquisition costs typically. And so, so I don't really do that. Now, if I'm an applied AI company, absolutely. Like I might even forego doing digital and have a very concerted effort from an event strategy perspective. But let's stick with your scenario, the horizontal. So from an event perspective, what I would then do is also look to do thought leadership, okay? And the thought leadership comes in two forms. One is through traditional PR by going out and creating thought leadership pieces and selling that to reporters, right, to get placements. So that's one. The other one would be to respond to call for papers and be speaking at various events. And again, what people tend to want to do, it's just like with PR, like, you know, a startup guy will say, I want to be in the Wall Street Journal. And I'm like, well, you're probably not going to get into the Wall Street Journal. That's pretty darn hard to do, right? Like, let's crawl, let's run, walk, then run, right? Let's not go like full gear. And the same thing's true for like call for papers. Start out in regional, smaller kind of events, and then gain a reputation, have a talk track that you're really comfortable with, do more like podcasting because that helps you with getting your sea legs around your talk track, and then go and start going up. And those bigger events really are for around joint customer successes, right? That's how you can get into those, is go speak with a customer, right? Because then that's real world and people appreciate that.
Okay. So in this case, you are saying brand awareness through digital, and like the actual purchase persona, the economic persona, through actual relationships, like real life relationships. Would you say that this is
and
because
through
of
digital,
and
right?
through
So
digital
what do I
together?
mean? Right. So what I mean, typically that means paid search, right? To get to, and the way that you get people in is through high value content, right? So you have to have a content strategy that is the conversion points around the high value content. So you got to be adding value, right? So let's again use the horizontal AI. If what you're talking about to people is churn prediction, not so interesting. There's like lots and lots of competition out there for that, right? But if you have some uniqueness, let's say around your churn prediction, where your platform can get, I don't know, let's call it a 20% lift over traditional models, you lead with book that highlights that, right? You got to be more, if you're in red shark infested territory, which horizontal AI platforms are, you have to be more quantitatively based in order to get the attention of the buyers, right? There has to be something very valuable.
Do you think this is a demographic thing that, I don't know, 20 years from now, it will be all in the digital side? Or do you think that it's just a maturity thing where any like end user, which is a technical user, at some point grows in the organization and it's more driven through relational value? I mean, human to human communication and more strategic thinking. And it will be the same now and in 20 years.
It'll change in 20 years for sure. And people buy from people, they don't buy from digital, right? But they become aware and gain interest through digital, right? And so when you're doing your campaign planning, right? Right now, I've been doing some research on this, and I don't have the best data. So prior to COVID, it was taking somewhere around 50 to almost 60 touches in order to get a lead to convert to a marketing qualified lead in business to business. What I have found so far is that it seems to be somewhere between 15 to 30 currently, which doesn't make sense to me after COVID that it would be less, but that's what the data I'm finding shows that. But in any case, let's say it's 30 touches in order to get a conversion point. That is a combination of digital plus inside sales, like salespeople, and so that's like marketing nurture sequences. That's the ads to get them in to begin with. It's offering up on an ongoing basis high value content like in the nurture streams. It's having inside sales follow up on leads and at the appropriate points. It's figuring out what's the duration of your nurture sequence to get those 30 touches. That duration is tied to your average sales cycle. So like if you have a 6-month sales cycle, your nurture campaign should happen at least over half of that period of time, if not the full period of time. And once that nurture campaign, because your nurture campaign is trying to get the conversion, right? So you are going for a hard conversion at some point to get them to be a marketing qualified lead. If you haven't achieved that over your duration, let's call it the 6 months, then you put them on a drip campaign, or I call it a heartbeat campaign, where it's like once a month. So you stay in front of them, because if they're in your database, they've expressed some interest, but they just may not have high buyer. It may be very early in their journey, and it doesn't mean like they won't convert. So you want to stay in front of them and be top of mind over some period of time.
Now let's reverse, not reverse the game, let's just change the type of company we have. And this applies to most startups we see nowadays, where they don't have an AI product, okay? They serve a different market. Let's say, for example, that we are an email marketing CRM platform, okay? Something very traditional as it can be nowadays. But now we have generative AI, so everybody wants to say that they have AI inside their product and they are AI driven, although they are solving a very simple problem, which is email marketing as a whole. How would you change, in case you will change? I'm not sure if that will be the right strategy. Your marketing strategy now that you have AI features as part of your platform.
Yeah. So in that case, it's essentially like Salesforce. When Salesforce added Einstein, right? They added AI capabilities into Salesforce, right? And CRM had been around, is quite mature, right? And so what did they do? They started, it's not a whole lot different, right? They created brand awareness around the Einstein capability and then started really pushing those features into their nurture streams as upfront, and center. They also did a product launch, right? And so that's a little bit different, right? That's where product marketing is like involved and the rest of the marketing team. But you would do a product launch, right? And so depending on the company, the size of the company, let's assume it's a mature company, so they've got a decent budget, right? What are you going to do for a product launch? You're going to perhaps do a roadshow to analysts. If not, you're at least going to be doing briefings to analysts to make them aware of your new AI capabilities and why you've modernized and why you're going to gain market share. You're going to maybe do a roadshow with existing customers, maybe, and prospects, like in different cities, right? So roadshows, again, more expensive, but it's a great way to reinvigorate your customer base and to have them speaking with new prospective customers, right? So that those are a couple of things that you would do a little bit differently in that case.
Yeah. In case if, let's say it's not a mature company but an early stage startup, which are more prone to be, victims of this fear of missing out, and everybody, is using AI, and we have to use AI, but we are not even solving our actual problem at this point. Would you advise them to go with AI, or is like just focus on your actual problem and address that problem until you solve it?
So that one is a little bit harder to answer, right? Because it could be the reason that they're not getting to where they need to be to solve the problem is because they're not using something like AI, right?
Okay.
So if they're not, so the way I would say it is that can they solve the customer's problem by leveraging data? And if they can, right, then they would build in that AI capability. And to your point, would you then market it as like a new kind of no, because you're solving the customer's problem, right? But now, so oftentimes one of the key elements in marketing I find companies often miss is a brand promise, okay? And a brand promise acts as a magnet to attract the right people to you, okay? And it therefore is a deterrent for the wrong prospects to be talking to you and wasting your time, right? And what a brand promise does is it is what you absolutely are going to walk over hot coals, go through, hell to get them to this promised land of whatever it is that you're promising. So when you make a promise, you have to be able to live up to it, right? So the way that you do that from a proactive perspective is you make a brand promise and then you give them proof points on how you're going to deliver on that brand promise, okay? And then if you don't deliver on that, it will be worse than never having created one. So you better be able to deliver on it. But to like this scenario, you have a brand promise of wherever it is that you're taking them to. And then one of the proof points is in the AI capabilities that you now have, right? So through this action, right, they're going to be able to get to that brand promise.
Yeah. So as long as it is aligned with the company's vision and it makes sense to solve this problem, then go for it.
Yes. So that gets back to I didn't talk about it, but a messaging framework, right? So what you do is you start out with your vision. Vision is the promised land of where you're taking your customers to. The mission, okay, is how are you going to get them there? Okay, so that starts to now talk about your product a little bit, right? And then from there, you go to your brand promise, and underlying your brand promise are brand promise pillars. And then you have your proof points underneath that that actually help you to live up to that brand promise. So I'll give you an example. When I was at Netezza, we had our brand promise was we were 10 to 100 times faster, okay, than any other data warehouse that was out there. Underlying that in our brand promise pillars, they're like a triangle. You have a lead brand promise and you have two supporting brand promises. So our lead brand promise was all about speed. We were about speed. And the two supporting ones were about performance, and that was about value ratio, and the other one was about simplicity. So everything that we did in the business, we operationalized this brand promise. So when new chips came out, and people would say, well, why aren't you using the new chip? Because we knew that our price performance ratio that we were giving customers, so the cost per terabyte, was within a certain ratio. And if this new chip meant that we were going to be outside of that ratio, we wouldn't use it, because we knew our customers weren't going to spend 2x, okay, even though they could get better performance, right? Because there was some price sensitivity, right? All customers have price sensitivity. And so we were very clear about that. But we always got them the best speed for that price performance ratio. And like simplicity was, we were an appliance. So we were like dead simple. Like you go and you plug us in and it just works, okay? And it did. So we, of course, had it in our product around simplicity, but we also had it around how did we operationalize our business. So most enterprise software companies, they want the customer to agree to their terms and conditions in terms of a business agreement. Most customers, if you're JP Morgan, you don't want to have like all these one-offs, right? You want them to agree to your master service agreement, your terms and conditions. And so we empowered our salespeople on the front line to be able to make that call. We had very clear, like, these are the things we would not concede on. If their terms and conditions didn't violate any of these, we could write it on their paper. And up front, the salesperson would say, hey, we can't live with number 1 or number 3 on your contract. And now, instead of spending months going back and forth negotiating, we had a very simple conversation. Like, they would be like, okay, so you're taking like the other 100 things and these are the only 2 that you have pushback on? And we'd say yes, right? And so they would concede, right? Like, we'd get to a middle ground much faster, right? By being able to do that. So we were simple and easy to do business with as well. So that's when I say, like, you have to live up to your brand promise. You have to be able to operationalize it in everything you do in a company, not just in marketing. It applies to the whole company.
So you need to align basically with vision, mission, culture, or with your why, how, and what you do.
Exactly. Yep.
Nice. So let's wrap up here. It has been like an amazing conversation, Michelle. I've been enjoying it too much. And I think we need to have a second episode, like a part 2 of this episode. What would be 3 books you would like to recommend to our audience?
Okay, I came prepared because I love reading and reading books. Okay, the first one I have is by Nancy Harhut, and it's called Using Behavioral Science in Marketing. And this is one of the most practical books I've ever read around marketing. It gives you, it's all research-based, and it tells you how to write statements, how to write CTAs, all kinds of stuff to get outcomes that you're looking for. So that's number 1. Number 2 is April Dunford's sales pitch, okay? And April Dunford is a marketing guru, and I've been using essentially this technique for like 25 years, but she really crystallizes it very well in this book, and tells you essentially, she uses this great story of she had to go buy a toilet one day, okay? And she's not an expert toilet buyer. And the first guy place she went into, and the salesperson, he tried to sell her on toilets, okay? And all it did was make her go away, because like she shut down. She didn't know, she's not an expert, right? And next time she came in, because she still needed a toilet, another salesperson was there, and he helped her buy Okay, she knew what she needed. He asked the right questions, and based on that, he gave her recommendations and really took her on that, held her hand to buy a toilet. Okay, and very happy with the toilet. And that is how you actually should structure presentations. And so this book gives you the framework for doing that. The third book is a product management book, and it's by Marty Kagan, and it's called Inspired, and it's about how to create products that customers love. And he has lots of good nuggets in here and frameworks for how product marketing and product management work together to create products that customers that customers just want to buy. So those are the three that I would recommend.
I would like to add a fourth, which doesn't exist yet, at least it's not available to the market. So stay up with Michele, because she's going to publish her fifth book.
Yes.
Soon. Do you have any expected launch date?
It'll be sometime in the upcoming year, but I don't have a date yet. Yeah. So, perfect. But it'll be in FY24. So, yep.
Perfect. Amazing.
Looking
forward to it.
This was my pleasure. I hope you have a great day and a wonderful holiday season. I so much appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Michele. Looking forward for your book and to have you on a second part of this podcast.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.